The worker raised his hand to hit him again, but the dog shielded a puppy with his body, and what happened next made everyone cry. When Gabriel Smith peered across the open ocean that morning, he did not expect his routine trip to become life-changing. The world around him looked vast and indifferent, a brilliant sky, water shimmering under a nascent sun, and gentle waves tapping the hull of his modest fishing vessel. 50 kilometers offshore was no place to find anything but horizon, yet as he stood at the bow, scanning the water, an odd silhouette bobbed in the distance. At first he thought it was debris or a buoy. Then it moved, a deliberate movement, unthinkable so far from land. Curious and uneasy, Gabriel steered closer. His pulse kicked up when he realized the shape was alive. Against all odds, it looked like a dog struggling alone in the open sea. He cut the engine, letting the boat drift toward the animal. The dog's head bobbed between waves, each movement labored yet purposeful. Gabriel's heart clenched as he imagined how long it had battled exhaustion out here. He grabbed a rope and with trembling voice called, "Over here, boy!" He feared the dog might panic and slip beneath the surface. Instead, the animal angled toward him, driven by a faint spark of hope. As the vessel drew nearer, Gabriel extended an arm, straining to reach. Finally, he latched onto matted fur and hauled the creature on deck. Water streamed off the dog's body, revealing a lean, shivering German shepherd whose eyes reflected both relief and terror in equal measure. Gabriel knelt beside the shepherd, adrenaline coursing through him. He draped a frayed towel over the dog's back, whispering words of comfort he hoped it understood. The dog offered no resistance, too drained to protest or flee. Inspecting its body, Gabriel noted raw paw pads and a battered collar with a rusted tag. The letters were hard to read, but he could make out the name, Hawk. A wave of empathy washed over him. How had Hawk ended up here, drifting alone in the open sea? The fisherman offered a trickle of fresh water from a canteen. Hawk licked it ravenously, as if this small kindness were a lifeline pulling him back from the brink. As the boat bobbed gently, Gabriel started the engine and turned toward shore. He had planned to stay out longer, but Hawk's condition demanded immediate care. The fisherman couldn't shake a sense of wonder at the dog's sheer will to survive. Every now and then, Hawk glanced at him with a mix of weariness and gratitude. Though they were strangers, a silent bond was forming, one forged by circumstance, yet strengthened by compassion. The glare of the sun sparkled on the water, and Gabriel squinted, calculating the hours it would take to return. He hoped the dog would remain stable until they reached the harbor's modest clinic, where a local vet might offer help. Hawk's shallow, steady breaths were the only sound besides the hum of the motor. Clouds gathered as afternoon wore on, threatening a shift in weather. Gabriel pushed the throttle harder, determined to outrun any approaching storm. He occasionally checked on Hawk, offering bits of jerky and sips of water. The dog swallowed each morsel as if it were precious. Beneath the ragged fur and trembling limbs, Gabriel sensed a resilience that defied logic. Part of him marveled at the mystery. How long had Hawk struggled among the waves, and why? There were rumors of people discarding pets at sea, but the idea sickened him. The notion of this proud shepherd cast aside like unwanted cargo stirred a fierce protectiveness in Gabriel. He resolved to uncover the dog's story if they both made it back safely. They spotted land by early evening. A strip of shoreline emerged in the distance, and Gabriel exhaled in relief. His arms ached, but every twinge felt like progress. By the time he navigated into the small harbor, dusk was settling, painting the sky with orange and purple hues. Several townsfolk, seeing the unusual passenger, rushed to help. Among them was Dr. Maria Ellington, a quiet veterinarian known for her skill with stray animals. She beckoned Gabriel to carry Hawk to her nearby clinic, a modest building near the water's edge. Inside, the hum of fluorescent lights and the sharp smell of antiseptics greeted them. Without delay, Dr. Ellington began examining Hawk, her expression shifting from professional calm to concerned focus. Gabriel hovered anxiously while Dr. Ellington checked the dog's heartbeat, hydration, and injuries. Hawk lay still, spent from the ordeal. The veterinarian asked questions Gabriel could not answer. Where did he come from? How long had he been at sea? And who might be searching for him? Each question underscored the mystery swirling around the shepherd. She administered fluids and tended to minor wounds, praising Hawk for his remarkable resilience. By the end, she could only offer an optimistic caution. With rest, nourishment, and luck, the dog had a fair chance of survival. Stepping outside to let Hawk sleep, Gabriel felt the weight of the day descend, yet a spark of hope lingered in his chest. Night fell on the harbor. A single lamppost illuminated the clinic's entrance, where Gabriel sat on a bench replaying the rescue in his mind. He recalled Hawk's exhausted eyes and that battered collar, each detail fueling new questions. Footsteps approached, and Dr. Ellington joined him, a gentle smile on her face. She handed him a small metal tag that she'd cleaned. The lettering was clearer now, confirming Hawk, and a phone number so worn it was barely legible. "We'll try calling in the morning," she said. Gabriel nodded, rubbing the tag with his thumb. He felt oddly protective, as if he owed the dog a second chance. For a man accustomed to solitude, this bond formed in salt water felt unexpectedly profound. While the town slept, Gabriel dozed fitfully in an old chair near Hawk's kennel. Occasionally, the dog whimpered in its sleep, haunted by unknown memories of the sea. Each sound tugged at Gabriel's conscience. He'd never seen himself as the nurturing type, yet the idea of leaving Hawk alone felt impossible. Dawn arrived with a pale light creeping through the windows. Dr. Ellington confirmed that Hawk's vitals had stabilized overnight. Encouraged, Gabriel stepped outside to phone the fated number. After a few attempts, a voice answered. It was weary, older, and startled to hear about a missing German shepherd. The man on the other end gave a single directive. "Don't let him out of your sight. I'm coming." Less than 2 hours later, an old pickup truck rattled onto the clinic's gravel lot. A tall, broad-shouldered man emerged, his face etched with worry. He introduced himself as David, Hawk's owner. A hush fell as he stepped inside, scanning the room until his gaze locked onto the exhausted shepherd. For a moment, neither man nor dog moved. Then Hawk's ears pricked and he struggled upright, tail thumping weakly against the kennel wall. The reunion was quiet, yet profound. Hawk pressed his muzzle into David's outstretched hands, and Gabriel could almost feel the raw relief radiating between them. Dr. Ellington explained Hawk's condition, cautioning that full recovery would require time and care. David nodded, voice thick with gratitude. He revealed that Hawk had fallen overboard during a tumultuous trip days ago, presumed lost at sea. No search effort had succeeded, yet here he was, alive because a fisherman refused to ignore a distant silhouette. Overwhelmed, David turned to Gabriel. "I can't ever repay you," he said. Gabriel shrugged, feeling an unexpected lump in his throat. Before either man could speak further, Hawk let out a quiet bark as if reminding them of the miracle they had all witnessed. Indeed, everything had changed in a single extraordinary day. In that hush, a new chapter in all their lives began. The hush lingered in the clinic long after David knelt beside Hawk and stroked the dog's damp fur. Even after everything settled and Dr. Ellington confirmed Hawk would recover well, neither Gabriel nor David felt ready to leave. Both men sensed some unspoken link they shared, bound by the dog's improbable survival and the battered collar that bore Hawk's name. Gabriel stood with arms crossed, eyes flicking between David and the drowsy shepherd, wondering what lay beneath the surface of the older man's quiet demeanor. David, for his part, seemed equally uneasy, as though bracing for a question he wasn't sure how to answer. At last, Dr. Ellington suggested they step outside, giving Hawk time to rest in a kennel lined with soft blankets. The morning sun glowed over the harbor's ragged rooftops, and fishermen bustled along the docks, preparing for another day at sea. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp and hungry. Gabriel inhaled the salty breeze and tried to phrase his curiosity gently. "If it's not too personal," he began, "how exactly did Hawk end up out there?" His gaze held no accusation, merely genuine concern. David exhaled, pressing a palm to his forehead as if the memory weighed heavily. "I was sailing a small craft from a nearby marina. I'm no professional, just someone who enjoys the water. A sudden squall hit, bigger than anything I'd anticipated. Hawk was with me, but the boat lurched violently in the storm. By the time I realized he'd been swept overboard, it was too late. 1 minute he was there, the next he was gone." Gabriel pictured the chaos. Waves pounding, wind screaming, a helpless dog lost to the dark. A pang of empathy made him swallow hard. "You tried searching?" he asked. David nodded, his voice tight. "I radioed the Coast Guard. Spent hours circling the spot before the winds drove me back. Eventually I lost hope. Even the authorities said no dog could last long in those conditions." His face clouded with grief and guilt. And yet he did. They stood silently for a moment, each man lost in thought. The revelation that Hawk's survival truly bordered on miraculous both humbled and intrigued them. Gabriel pictured the exhausted creature floundering in dark water. A part of him wanted to know exactly what kept Hawk alive. Sheer will? Instinct? Something else entirely? He cleared his throat, deciding not to press further. "He's lucky you didn't give up," Gabriel said softly. David looked at him, half smiling in a sad way. "No," David replied, shaking his head. "He's lucky you didn't." Before either man could continue, Dr. Ellington came outside holding a clipboard. "Hawk will need rest, medication for possible infections, and gentle exercise later," she said. "I'll keep him here for at least a day. After that, he can go home, assuming we don't see complications." Her eyes moved to David. "He'll need calm, stable surroundings. Any stress could slow his recovery." David glanced down as though uncertain. "I don't actually live here," he admitted. "I'm staying temporarily at a motel near the marina, so I don't really have a proper setup for him." Gabriel absorbed that in silence. A sense of responsibility tugged at him. Maybe it was the memory of Hawk's trembling body when he first pulled him on deck, or the dog's quiet trust in him during the ride back. Whatever it was, it compelled him to speak. "If you like," Gabriel offered hesitantly. "Hawk can stay at my place a few days. I have a spare room, and I'm not far from here. That way, Dr. Ellington can check on him without you needing to travel constantly." David looked surprised, yet relief lit his face. That would be an immense help," he said. "I truly appreciate it. Once Hawk's well enough, I plan to head home, wherever that is next." Something about David's uncertain phrasing made Gabriel wonder if the man had a stable life at all, yet he didn't pry. Everyone carried burdens they might not be ready to share. That afternoon, Gabriel visited Hawk to keep him company. The German shepherd, though still weak, perked up when Gabriel approached. There was recognition in those dark eyes, as though Hawk remembered who had fished him from the sea. Gabriel crouched beside the kennel, speaking softly. "We'll have you on your paws soon," he murmured. "Meanwhile, you'll stay with me. Hope you don't mind a small cottage by the shore." Hawk blinked languidly, letting out a tiny sigh. Just that quiet exchange spurred Gabriel's resolve to look after him. Later in the day, when Dr. Ellington pronounced Hawk stable enough to leave the clinic the next morning, Gabriel and David made arrangements. David insisted on paying for medication and food, but Gabriel refused half the offers. "I did what anyone should do," he said, though in truth he knew many would have ignored a drifting shape at sea. His small cottage, perched on a rocky hillside facing the water, was no palace, but he kept it tidy enough. The idea of sharing space with a large dog was new, but he felt strangely at peace. By sunset, the two men found themselves side by side at a local diner near the harbor, waiting for takeout while finalizing plans. They sat at a worn counter, the smell of fried fish and potatoes mingling with the briny air that slipped through a half-open door. Neither was a man of many words, but the day's events had forged a quiet camaraderie. David rubbed a hand over his stubbled jaw. "I can't stop thinking about everything Hawk went through. Honestly, the boat I lost was expensive, but I'd have traded 10 of those to see him safe sooner." Gabriel thought of his modest fishing vessel, battered but reliable. Money had never been his reason for living. The sea was enough. Yet he recognized the sincerity in David's eyes. They parted ways under the diner's yellowed light. Gabriel promised to pick Hawk up first thing in the morning and bring him home. David lingered, looking grateful yet uncertain, as if part of him wanted to say more but lacked the courage. Gabriel wondered if the older man might be haunted by regrets beyond losing Hawk, but all he said was, "See you tomorrow." That night, back at his cottage, Gabriel busied himself clearing a corner of his living room. He laid out old blankets and a soft rug to form a makeshift bed for Hawk, checking and rechecking that the space would be comfortable. Each gesture felt like a promise. "You're safe here. Rest. Heal." An odd sense of anticipation kept him awake, making him realize how rarely he'd opened his life to anyone or anything. He remembered the first glint of Hawk's form in the distance, how it had shifted his perspective in an instant. Sleep came slowly, filled with images of dark waves and the shepherd's exhausted gaze. Morning arrived bright and clear, the sea calm, as if offering an apology for the storm. Dr. Ellington greeted Gabriel at the clinic, handing over medication and detailed instructions. "Light walks only, once his energy is up," she emphasized. "A dog that endured that kind of trauma might also be jumpy or stressed. Watch for signs of anxiety." Gabriel nodded earnestly, wanting to do things right. Hawk, for his part, seemed eager to leave. His tail wagged faintly when he saw Gabriel, though his movements were slow. David appeared by the door, a bag of supplies in hand. "Food, bowl, leash," he listed, plus a few toys he used to like. He knelt to scratch behind Hawk's ears. "I'll drop by tomorrow to see how he's doing. Just call me if anything changes." Gabriel loaded Hawk into his truck, carefully lifting the dog onto the back seat where a soft blanket awaited. Settling behind the wheel, he glanced at Hawk through the rearview mirror. The shepherd gazed out the window, alert despite fatigue. The short drive to the cottage was surreal, as though some quiet shift had taken place in Gabriel's life. By the time they arrived, Hawk was already attempting to stand, curious about his new surroundings. Gabriel opened the door slowly. "Easy, boy," he murmured, then gently supported Hawk as he hopped out. The dog sniffed the ground, ears pricked with interest. Birds chirped from a clump of nearby trees. Salt air drifted from the water below. Gabriel guided Hawk inside, leading him to the makeshift bed. Hawk tested the blankets, circled once, then settled with a sigh that spoke of relief. The next few days unfolded in a gentle rhythm. Gabriel rose at dawn to check on Hawk, preparing a simple breakfast for both of them. After days of appetite loss at the clinic, the shepherd devoured each meal with newfound vigor. Dr. Ellington stopped by, verifying the healing progress. David called often, ensuring all was well. Although polite, he never lingered on the phone. Whenever he visited, his conversations with Gabriel remained reserved, but not unfriendly. Gabriel noticed the relief in David's posture whenever he found Hawk comfortable and safe. Each afternoon, Gabriel took Hawk for brief, slow walks along a quiet trail behind the cottage. The dog's steps grew steadier, his gaze sharper, as if reclaiming his dignity with every stride. Neighbors occasionally peered curiously at the unlikely pair, the solitary fisherman and a handsome German shepherd wearing a bandage on one leg. But none asked direct questions, used to Gabriel's private nature. Meanwhile, something in Gabriel's heart softened each time Hawk bumped a wet nose against his hand or lay contentedly by his feet in the evening. He'd never planned to have a dog, let alone rescue one from the ocean, yet this bond felt as natural as breathing. One afternoon, as they rested on a bench behind the cottage, Hawk dozed at Gabriel's side. The fisherman's gaze strayed out to the sea that had once nearly claimed the shepherd's life. He recalled how the horizon had appeared empty that fateful morning. Now it seemed brimming with possibility. The sun glistened off the water as though winking at them both. And Gabriel realized something he could never have anticipated. By saving Hawk, he might have saved a part of himself too. Gabriel first noticed something shifting in Hawk's demeanor on a cool, crisp morning when the wind carried the faint scent of autumn. The dog had been recuperating in the cottage for a week, his energy returning bit by bit. Every sunrise, Gabriel found Hawk a little steadier on his paws and a little more confident in his new surroundings. Yet on this particular day, as they set out for their brief morning walk, the German shepherd paused by the cottage door, ears erect as though catching an echo beyond the rustle of leaves. Gabriel gently prompted him, "Come on, boy." But Hawk stood rooted, a low whine escaping his throat. Not wanting to force him, Gabriel merely waited. He watched as Hawk's nose twitched toward a distant patch of pine trees, his stance alert. The dog's gaze flicked back and forth, as if anticipating something or someone. "You okay?" Gabriel asked softly, but Hawk offered no answer except another soft whimper. At last, the dog took a careful step forward, then another, letting Gabriel guide him around the cottage's perimeter. Still, a sense of unease lingered in the crisp air. Later that day, Dr. Ellington dropped by for a routine check. "He's physically on the mend," she said, kneeling to run a gentle hand along Hawk's spine. "But sometimes trauma surfaces in unexpected ways." She noted Hawk's tenseness, the way he kept glancing out the window. "A traumatic event can leave deep imprints on animals as much as on us," she explained. Gabriel nodded, remembering the moment he hauled Hawk out of the waves, how close the shepherd had been to the brink. He wondered if something in the wind, the shifting season, had triggered a recollection of that fateful night. David visited the following morning, arriving with a bag of supplies and a subdued smile. He crouched beside Hawk, letting the dog sniff his hands before scratching him behind the ears. "You're looking good, partner," David murmured, relief underlying every word. Gabriel watched from a short distance. He noticed how Hawk responded, tail wagging faintly, though the shepherd still appeared preoccupied with whatever invisible tension had disturbed him the day before. Once David stood, Gabriel offered coffee. "How have you been?" he asked. David hesitated. "All right, I guess. Been staying at that motel by the marina, but He paused, picking at the coffee cup's cardboard sleeve. "I need to figure out my next steps." A silence hung between them. Gabriel sensed David's unease, as though the older man didn't quite know where he belonged anymore. "You're welcome here any time," Gabriel finally said, gesturing toward the small living area. The suggestion lingered, and David's eyes flicked around the cottage with an inscrutable expression. "It means a lot," David said slowly, as if each word cost him effort. "But I have obligations in a different town, some personal things to settle." He sighed, seeming momentarily exhausted. "I'm just not sure how or when." While they spoke, Hawk padded over to David's side and pressed against his leg, as if sensing the man's turmoil. Absently, David stroked the shepherd's neck. The depth of his bond with Hawk was plain. It had likely formed over years of shared routines and quiet loyalty. Gabriel considered how strange it must be for David to rely on another man to care for his dog. For a second, he felt a pang of sympathy, imagining roles reversed, but then he recalled the reason this arrangement existed at all: Hawk's rescue. That bright morning on the ocean had bound them in ways no one could have predicted. Afternoons in Gabriel's cottage acquired a gentle pattern. Whenever David dropped by, he and Gabriel spoke about Hawk's progress. They avoided prying too much into one another's personal histories, but bits of conversation revealed that David had lost his home months before the storm, his finances in disarray. He had taken to living in transient spots, always accompanied by Hawk. The boat that sank was the last of his investments, an attempt at starting a charter business. "Guess it just wasn't meant to be," David remarked one day, eyes fixed on a crack in the wooden floor. Gabriel's heart clenched at the resignation in his voice. Meanwhile, Hawk's alertness persisted. Dr. Ellington suggested that the dog might benefit from slow reintroduction to water, but only if done carefully. "It could help him overcome that lingering fear," she explained, "assuming he wants to. Some animals refuse to go near water after a life-threatening experience." Deciding to try, Gabriel coaxed Hawk down to the shoreline one afternoon. The waves rolled calmly against the rocks, reflecting a hazy sky. Hawk stretched his nose forward, sniffing the salt air, but didn't appear afraid. Instead, he walked up to where shallow waves washed the sand, letting the water lap at his paws. Gabriel stood behind him, not pushing. After a while, Hawk withdrew, tail swishing in thought. Gabriel quietly noted that although the dog's stance lacked its usual confidence, at least he wasn't fleeing in terror. Day by day, the German shepherd's old vitality began to shine again. He loped around the yard, played tug-of-war with a piece of knotted rope, and sometimes dozed contentedly at Gabriel's feet as the fisherman mended his nets. Once, Gabriel caught himself talking aloud to Hawk about mundane things: the best spots for fishing that season, the changes in tide, even trivial frustrations. It felt oddly natural, the dog's presence no longer an intrusion, but a steady companionship he hadn't realized he needed. The hush inside the cottage was less oppressive. In that sense, Hawk had become part of Gabriel's new normal. One crisp afternoon, Gabriel found David on the porch, staring at the sea with a distant look. He greeted the fisherman with a half-smile. "I'm heading out tomorrow," he announced. "I found a rental place a couple of hours north near a friend. They'll let me stay on the property with Hawk. Maybe I can find part-time work there." He paused, swallowing hard as if the admission stung. "I appreciate everything you've done, more than I can say." Gabriel took a moment before replying. He felt a mix of relief and sadness, not sure which was stronger. "You don't have to rush," he offered. "Hawk's welcome here until he's fully recovered." David shook his head gently. "I can't keep imposing on you, man, and the motel's not a long-term solution. I need to get back on my feet." A rueful smile tugged at his mouth. "Or at least try." That evening, Gabriel invited David for a simple meal. They grilled fish that Gabriel had caught, accompanied by roasted vegetables from a local farm. Hawk dozed beneath the table, his muzzle on his paws, but every so often his ears perked at the sound of their voices. The conversation drifted from fishing to childhood memories. David recounted how he found Hawk as a puppy, abandoned on a roadside. "He was so small, barely old enough to be off his mother's milk," he said. "I guess we've both been drifting from place to place ever since." There was a wistfulness to the story that made Gabriel's chest tighten. He wondered how a person could endure so much instability, yet still remain gentle enough to care for a vulnerable pup. When dinner finished, they lingered around the table, gazing at the moonlit water. David finally rose. "I'll pack Hawk's stuff tonight," he said, voice thick with finality. "We'll be out of your hair tomorrow morning." "You're not in my hair," Gabriel answered quietly, but he did not press further. Even with the tension in his chest, he respected David's decision. Some journeys couldn't be shared. The next morning arrived too soon. Dawn light spilled through the kitchen window as Gabriel prepared coffee, the scent filling the small space. Hawk lay nearby, already sensing a shift in routine. David entered with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "Hey," he greeted awkwardly, "mind if I borrow a crate for Hawk's stuff?" Gabriel nodded and fetched a sturdy old wooden box. He helped David gather the dog's bowls, medications, and a few toys. Hawk hovered uncertainly, tail wagging in slow arcs. Beneath his bright eyes, there was a flicker of concern. Gabriel patted the shepherd's side. "It's okay, buddy. You're going with your dad." The words felt heavier than he expected. They carried things to David's borrowed truck. The sky was pale gold, seagulls calling overhead. David gestured for Hawk to jump in. The shepherd hopped onto the back seat but glanced over at Gabriel, ears low. Gabriel patted Hawk's muzzle. "Be good," he whispered. "Take care of him, David." David cleared his throat. "He takes care of me. Always has." For a moment they simply looked at each other. Then David extended a hand. Gabriel shook it, a single firm clasp holding more gratitude than any words. As the engine turned over, Gabriel stepped back. Hawk pressed his nose to the window, tail giving a tentative thump. Gabriel forced a smile, lifting a hand in farewell. He stood there, watching the truck roll away until it disappeared around a bend, and the harbor's early bustle once more filled the air. The cottage felt oddly vacant when Gabriel returned. He ran a hand through his hair, taking in the sight of the small empty bed where Hawk once slept. Part of him hoped this wasn't truly the end of their path together. The following days passed in a blur. Gabriel resumed his fishing routine at dawn, traveling miles offshore in pursuit of the seasonal catch. Yet each time he cast his net or scanned the horizon, he couldn't help imagining a shape in the waves, a dog struggling against impossible odds. In the evenings, the hush inside his cottage returned, no quiet panting or soft paws tapping the floor. Sometimes he caught himself reaching down for a gentle pat, only to find empty space. Dr. Ellington called to see how he was faring. Her gentle voice betrayed that she sensed his loneliness. "Hawk's presence changed you," she observed. "It's normal to miss him. You did a wonderful thing." One late afternoon, nearly a week after David and Hawk had departed, Gabriel returned from a long day at sea to find an unexpected note stuck on his door. It bore a single sentence in David's firm, slanting handwriting. "I need your help. Come urgently." Gabriel's heart jolted. No explanation, nothing else. Just an address scrawled beneath it somewhere a couple hours north. Without hesitation, Gabriel tossed his gear aside, hopped back into his truck, and set off. Adrenaline surged in his veins as the road unfurled before him. Was Hawk in danger? Had David run into trouble? Every possible scenario churned through Gabriel's mind. He pressed the accelerator harder, determined to arrive before darkness cloaked the unfamiliar highways. Night fell, the headlights slicing through an endless stretch of winding road. At last, Gabriel spotted the turnoff indicated on the note. Gravel crunched beneath his tires as he followed a narrow path toward a faint glow in the distance. He parked near a dilapidated farmhouse, windows glowing weakly from the inside. He saw David's borrowed truck to one side, with a single porch light revealing chipped paint and sagging steps. Gabriel killed the engine and got out, scanning the yard. No sign of Hawk. A knot formed in his stomach. He stepped forward and knocked, heart pounding. He stepped forward and knocked, heart pounding. A hollow echo traveled through the farmhouse before the door creaked open. David stood on the other side, his eyes red-rimmed and weary. In the dim glow of a single overhead bulb, Gabriel could see lines of stress etched into David's face. Without preamble, David motioned him in. The living room was cramped, its walls bearing faded wallpaper and shelves stacked with tattered boxes. Hawk lay on a worn blanket in the corner, looking alert but tense. "I'm sorry," David said quietly as soon as Gabriel entered. "I had nowhere else to turn." He ran a trembling hand across his unshaven jaw, gesturing for Gabriel to follow him into a small side room. There, the furniture looked shoved aside in haste, and a battered suitcase lay open. "What's going on?" Gabriel asked, voice hushed. The tension in the air seemed thick enough to choke on. Outside, a dog barked in the distance, and an autumn wind rattled the farmhouse windows. David took a slow breath. "After we left your place, I came here, hoping to rent this property for a while. The owner agreed at first. He seemed decent. But tonight he showed up drunk, raving about money he claims I owe him. A few threats." His voice quavered. "I was trying to keep Hawk calm, but the man started banging on my door." Hawk growled. The landlord threatened to shoot him if he didn't shut up. David paused, pressing his lips into a thin line. "He stormed off eventually, but he could come back. I panicked." Gabriel's heart sank. One glance at Hawk confirmed the shepherd was agitated. The dog's ears flicked at every creak in the old house. With a pang, Gabriel realized the poor animal had scarcely had time to recover from nearly drowning. Now he was stuck in more turmoil. "You did right to call," Gabriel said. "But what's your plan?" David lowered his gaze. "I don't have one. I can't afford someplace better right now. My finances are still in shambles." He looked up, desperation in his eyes. "I don't want to put you out, but can you take Hawk again? Just until I figure this out?" Gabriel stared at the threadbare rug underfoot. Part of him worried David might vanish entirely, leaving the dog behind for good. Another part felt relief. He genuinely missed Hawk. In any case, it wasn't a question. Hawk needed safety. "Of course," he said, voice firm. "But let's get you both out of here tonight. Do you really want to stay, not knowing if that landlord will come around again?" David slumped onto the room's only chair, burying his face in his hands. "No," he admitted, "but I don't know where else I'd go." Gabriel felt a rush of resolve. "Come back to my cottage. At least for now. You can take the spare room." He hesitated, remembering how David had insisted on leaving before. "If you still want to. I won't pretend to know your situation, but you're not safe here." David looked up, amazement flickering across his face. "You'd do that? For me?" Gabriel managed a half smile. "For you and Hawk. But let's be clear, no indefinite illusions, just until you've sorted out where to go next." David exhaled, something like gratitude brightening his eyes. "Deal." Together, they packed David's belongings in silence. The tension eased slightly once the decision was made. Hawk padded over, tail wagging in a subdued but hopeful way, as if picking up on the shift in atmosphere. Gabriel patted the dog's head. "We're getting you out of here," he murmured. Outside, the wind howled, and every so often the house creaked as though it might collapse beneath the weight of its own history. An hour later, they were on the road in Gabriel's truck. David cradled a duffel on his lap while Hawk curled up in the back seat, eyes half closed. Although the tension lingered, the open road felt liberating after the stifling gloom of the farmhouse. They passed silent fields under a waning moon, eventually merging onto a main highway. Gabriel asked no questions about David's finances or the landlord, sensing it was all still raw. They reached the cottage well past midnight. The wind off the harbor carried a chill, but the familiar smell of salt and seaweed comforted Gabriel. He opened the door, flicked on a lamp, and gestured for David to bring Hawk inside. Tired though he was, Hawk seemed to perk up the moment he smelled the cottage's interior. Gabriel felt an unexpected warmth bloom in his chest, as if the dog's presence brought a missing piece of life back. While David took his suitcase to the small spare bedroom, Gabriel found an old blanket and laid it near Hawk's previous spot. He patted the folds. Hawk sniffed the fabric, gave one polite wag of his tail, and settled down with an air of relief. Not long after, David emerged, expression pensive. "Thanks for this," he murmured. "I'll try not to be a burden." Gabriel sighed. "Take one day at a time. You both deserve a place without threats hanging over your heads." With that, they agreed to sort things out in the morning. Despite the late hour, Gabriel couldn't sleep. He wandered into the kitchen, flicked on a small light, and poured himself a glass of water. Through the window, he saw a faint glow on the horizon, moonlight reflecting on the ocean. In the living room, Hawk was dozing. Occasionally, the shepherd twitched, perhaps dreaming of waves or farmland or something else entirely. David slept behind a closed door, presumably exhausted. A hush settled over the cottage. Gabriel stood in that quiet, letting the day's events sink in. Fate, it seemed, had no intention of letting Hawk out of his life. Morning came with a pastel sky that gradually shifted to a gentle gold. David stirred first, emerging from the spare room looking rumpled and uncertain. Gabriel, already up, offered coffee and bread. "No fish for breakfast," he joked lightly, "but there's jam." David managed a weak smile. They ate in near silence, occasionally giving Hawk tidbits. Finally, David said, "I can't keep drifting. I owe you more than gratitude. Maybe I can find a job around here, settle for a bit, even if it's just short-term." Gabriel sipped his coffee. "I know the harbor well. Some folks might need a hand. Deck work, fish processing. Hard labor, but it's honest." David's eyes flicked up. "I'm not above honest work. Anything that pays enough to keep a roof over our heads." They agreed to visit the harbor that afternoon, once David and Hawk felt ready. Meanwhile, Dr. Ellington popped by, having heard from a neighbor that Gabriel was housing more guests. She arrived with medical supplies, suspecting the stress of the farmhouse might have affected Hawk. After a quick examination, she declared the dog stable. "His heart rate's fine, though I see a bit of tension. He's lucky to have both of you looking out for him." Gabriel noticed David's ears redden, as though he felt unworthy of that praise. With the dog's health confirmed, they set out for the harbor, strolling along the docks. The water sparkled under a midday sun, gulls swooping for scraps. Fishermen in rubber boots shouted greetings to Gabriel, who introduced David as a friend looking for some work. Though David's handshake was firm, he seemed uneasy about each new encounter, as if bracing for rejection. Hawk walked calmly at his side, drawing curious glances. A few sailors scratched the shepherd behind the ears, remarking on his glossy coat. No one asked prying questions. They simply nodded, said they'd keep an ear out for opportunities, and moved on. Days blurred into a gentle routine. David cleaned and helped around the cottage, determined to contribute. Hawk resumed his old place by the window, occasionally trotting out onto the small porch to sniff the air. Gabriel guided David to the local canneries, suggesting he fill out applications. In the evenings, they prepared simple meals, fish, beans, rice, things that fit a modest budget. At first, conversation was strained. David apologized often for imposing. Gabriel brushed it off. Slowly, that friction eased. They began talking about everyday things, good fishing spots, local customs, or random memories. It felt oddly natural, as if the turmoil had forged a camaraderie neither expected. Hawk flourished with the relative stability. He followed Gabriel to the shoreline, sniffing crabs, barking at gulls. He accompanied David on errands around town. The dog's watchful eyes softened, his posture relaxed. The scars of his ordeal, both physical and emotional, seemed to fade, yet Gabriel sometimes caught Hawk gazing at the ocean horizon. He'd stand very still, nose lifted, as if remembering how that same ocean nearly took him. On those days, Gabriel would sit beside him, letting the moment pass in silence. As the season progressed, a brisk chill settled over the harbor. The leaves beyond the cottage turned gold, then russet, swirling off in blustery gusts. One crisp afternoon, as Gabriel mended nets and David stacked firewood behind the house, Hawk began pacing the yard, ears drawn back in alarm. He let out a startled bark and bolted toward the side gate. Gabriel's head whipped up, confusion turning to caution. "Hawk, come," he shouted. The shepherd froze, glancing back with a low growl. David dropped the wood and sprinted over, fear flashing in his eyes. "What's wrong, boy?" Rounding the corner, Gabriel spotted a figure leaning against the fence, half concealed by a dying bush. Even from a distance, the posture screamed trouble, shoulders hunched, face shadowed by a cap. Hawk's hackles rose, the dog letting out another sharp bark. David stepped forward, shielding Hawk with his body. "Who are you?" he called, voice taut. The figure lifted his head slightly, revealing a weathered face and crooked grin. "Just an old friend," he drawled. "Heard David might be living here now. Thought I'd drop by." Gabriel felt a knot of tension grip his chest. Instinct told him this man spelled danger. David's expression hardened. "What do you want?" he demanded, fists clenching. The stranger eyed Hawk warily. "Heard you left that farmhouse in a hurry. You still owe some debts, friend." He spat on the ground. "Debts your fancy dog can't pay off." Hawk snarled, stepping closer. The man backed up a fraction but held his stance. Gabriel placed a hand on David's shoulder, trying to keep him calm. "This is private property," Gabriel warned. "Leave now." The stranger smirked. "Fine, but I'll be seeing you. We always get what's owed." With that, he slunk away, boots scraping the gravel. Hawk let out a final menacing bark as the figure disappeared down the path. A charged silence followed. David stood breathing hard, color drained from his face. Gabriel exhaled. "So that's part of your past?" David nodded stiffly, not meeting Gabriel's gaze. "I never meant for it to catch up here." Hawk pressed against David's leg, as if sensing the anxiety roiling inside him. Gabriel's jaw tightened. He remembered how he'd found Hawk alone at sea, how none of it made sense until they discovered David's story. Now, fresh danger had materialized on their doorstep. He looked at David, who seemed frozen in a swirl of regret. "You won't face it alone," Gabriel said firmly, voice low. "We figure this out together." For a long moment after the stranger vanished, the yard felt charged with leftover menace. Gabriel remained by David's side, scanning the overgrown fence line and the path leading away from the cottage. Hawk's snarl slowly subsided to a low grumble, his ears pinned back as though expecting the intruder to reappear. David exhaled sharply, his cheeks flushed from a storm of emotion. At last, Gabriel crouched, laying a hand on Hawk's flank. The dog's muscles tensed, but he allowed the contact. Then Gabriel stood again, turning to David. "Let's go inside," he murmured. "We'll figure out how to handle this, step by step." David nodded, swallowing hard. Without another word, they headed into the cottage. Inside, tension still crackled. David paced the small living room, while Hawk stationed himself near the front window, staring out as though to ward off further threats. Gabriel shut the door behind them and quietly latched it. "Start from the beginning," he said, keeping his voice calm. David raked a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. "Those men are connected to debts I incurred back when I tried to save my business. They're not patient lenders. They want fast repayment, or else." He paused, eyes flicking to Hawk. "I never meant to endanger him. I had no place left. And now it's spilled over into your life too." Gabriel kept his expression steady. "We can handle it," he repeated. A knock at the door made them both jump. Hawk sprang up, his hackles high. Gabriel motioned for David to stay back. Peering through the window, he recognized Dr. Ellington's silhouette and immediately relaxed. He opened the door. Concern etched her features. "I saw a stranger lurking near your property," she explained. "Is everything okay?" Gabriel forced a tight smile. "We had a slight incident, but we're all right." She glanced at David, sensing the strain. Hawk sounded upset. "I was afraid something happened." David cleared his throat. "Thank you for checking on us. We're safe for now." Dr. Ellington nodded slowly. "If you need anything, call me and make sure Hawk doesn't stress too much. He's come so far." After she left, Gabriel locked the door again. He turned to find David slumped on the couch, head in his hands. Hawk padded over, pressing his muzzle against David's knee in silent comfort. Gabriel joined them, pulling a chair close. "We have to decide on a plan," he said. "Staying hidden won't solve this. If they know where you are, they'll come back." David nodded grimly. "I could try to get enough money to pay them off, but I'm still jobless. It would take ages." He swallowed, shoulders sagging. "I don't want to drag you into my mess." Gabriel met his gaze steadily. "We're already in it together. Hawk is part of this household now, and so are you." A hush settled over the room. Eventually, David exhaled. "I can't let them bully me forever. But it's also not simple. They're not the kind of people who just fade away." Hawk, picking up on the tension, settled at Gabriel's feet, resting his chin on Fisherman's boot. Gabriel scratched the dog's ears, feeling warmth of loyalty. "Maybe it's time to confront them," he suggested gently. "If they show up again, we can't just chase them off, but also you can't live under their shadow." David let out a dry laugh. "You make it sound straightforward." Gabriel's tone softened. "I know it isn't, but I'll stand by you." They spoke into the afternoon, discussing possibilities. David could attempt to negotiate a payment plan, though that rarely worked with men who operated outside the law. He could contact authorities, but there was scant evidence. Meanwhile, the cottage felt increasingly vulnerable, hidden away at the harbor's edge. Dr. Ellington's concern lingered in Gabriel's mind. Stress would hinder Hawk's emotional healing. They had come so far to restore the shepherd's trust in a safe world, and now these threats loomed like storm clouds. After a thoughtful pause, Gabriel made a decision. "What if we secure the cottage?" he said. "Install better locks, lights, maybe even cameras. We can also talk to the local authorities. Our sheriff's fair-minded. He might help if trouble arises." David looked at him, hope warring with despair in his eyes. "You do all that? For me?" Gabriel shrugged. "I'll do it for Hawk," he teased, trying to lighten the mood. "And you happen to come with the package." A flicker of a grin crossed David's face. "All right, let's do it." Over the next 2 days, they put the plan into motion. They visited the hardware store for sturdier locks and borrowed a ladder to fix motion-activated lights around the perimeter. With each improvement, Hawk watched curiously, sometimes tilting his head as if wondering why his peaceful domain was turning into a small fortress. Gabriel patted the dog's side, murmuring that it was all for their safety. Once they finished, they took a step back, surveying the newly reinforced cottage. At dusk, the motion lights clicked on, illuminating the yard in a soft glow that extended to the gate. Hawk tested them by wandering around, setting the sensors off. The effect gave Gabriel a measure of comfort. Any uninvited visitor would face a well-lit approach. Meanwhile, David visited the local sheriff, quietly inquiring about potential help. The sheriff, a gruff man named Rogers, listened intently but explained that without solid evidence of harassment or crime, his hands were tied. "If they trespass or threaten you directly, call us," Rogers said. "We can't arrest them for rumors." David left the station feeling both relieved and uneasy. Over dinner that night, Gabriel cooked a hearty stew, determined to keep morale from sinking. Hawk lounged by the fireplace, occasionally lifting his nose to catch savory aromas. David sipped his drink in silence until he finally looked up. "I'm grateful," he said softly. "Truly. But I also hate how I've upended your life." Gabriel shook his head. "My life wasn't much to upend. Just me, the sea, and an empty cottage." He paused, considering the stark truth of that. Actually, Hawk's presence changed the cottage for the better, and having another person around reminded me that living alone doesn't have to be the default. David nodded, absorbing those words. Outside, the wind brushed the windows, yet the interior felt warm. That warmth was tested the next afternoon when a small truck rumbled up the lane. Hawk, dozing on the porch, jolted awake, barking sharply. Gabriel rushed out to see a delivery driver hop down, holding a package. The tension that soared in his chest took a moment to settle when he realized it wasn't the threat they feared. David stepped out behind him, looking momentarily shaken. Even Hawk's bark held a new edge, as if the dog sensed their heightened vigilance. After signing for the delivery, Gabriel patted Hawk's flank, murmuring praise for his alertness. "You're our sentinel now," he said quietly. Hawk responded with a quick, firm wag of his tail. Despite the worry and the unknown future, they were in this together. Even with the new security measures, the cottage seemed to hold its breath. Nights were restless. Each time a branch creaked or the wind changed direction, Gabriel caught himself straining to hear footsteps, half expecting the stranger to return. The worry weighed on David too. His features had grown more haggard, and on more than one occasion, Gabriel found him checking the locks at 2 a.m. Hawk, sensing the tension, prowled quietly from room to room, as if standing guard for them both. One afternoon, a break in the unsettled mood came from an unlikely source. Word spread that the annual Harbor Festival was still on schedule despite the turning weather. Families flocked to the docks each year for music, fresh seafood, and local crafts. Gabriel usually avoided the crowd, preferring the solitude of open water, but Dr. Ellington dropped by to suggest they attend. "A little normalcy might help," she said. "Go, bring Hawk. Let him see the world is still good. You both could use the distraction." David agreed, though his expression betrayed some hesitation. "I'm not sure how he'll handle crowds," he said, glancing at the shepherd lying on the porch. Hawk's ears twitched as if he understood. Gabriel shrugged. "He seemed okay around the fishermen. We'll keep a close eye on him." And so they set out on a crisp weekend morning, hoping a bit of community spirit would soothe their collective anxiety. As they arrived, the festival was already buzzing. Booths lined the harbor front, each offering something different: steaming bowls of chowder, salted fish fillets, homemade jams, and carved wooden trinkets. Children ran about, balloons in hand, while older folks pored over handcrafted souvenirs. Hawk walked beside Gabriel, tail swishing with guarded curiosity at the new sights and sounds. David lingered behind them, scanning the crowd for any sign of trouble. They soon encountered a friendly knot of fishermen Gabriel knew. One bearded man leaned down to rub Hawk's ears. "This that famous shepherd you rescued from the middle of the sea?" he asked with a grin. "He's a legend around here, boy. People say he swam halfway to another continent." Gabriel laughed softly. "Well, maybe not quite that far, but he's a survivor." The men bantered about the latest catches and the ups and downs of the market. David listened quietly, occasionally offering a nod. Hawk accepted cautious pats from strangers, though now and then he pressed closer to Gabriel's leg, seeking reassurance. Midway through the festival, Dr. Ellington showed up carrying a bag of produce. "Look at you, Hawk," she cooed, offering the dog a small piece of cooked fish from her paper carton. "Living the celebrity life." Hawk sniffed, then accepted the morsel, his mouth closing delicately. Gabriel watched with an odd sense of pride, reminded yet again how far the dog had come from that day at sea. But just as he started to relax, David went rigid. Gabriel followed his line of sight and spotted a man near the edge of the crowd, someone with a gaunt face wearing a stained baseball cap. The man caught David's stare and slunk away behind a booth. Gabriel's pulse kicked up. Before he could speak, David took a step as if to follow. "Wait," Gabriel cautioned, gripping David's elbow. "We don't know if it's him for sure." The flash of fear in David's eyes was unmistakable. "It looked like one of them," he muttered, "or close to it." Hawk, sensing the tension, let out a low, protective growl. Dr. Ellington, oblivious to their sudden alarm, continued chatting with other festival goers. Gabriel gently guided David and Hawk away from the throng, weaving between stalls until they reached the quieter far end of the pier. There, the wind carried the tang of brine, and the crowd noise receded enough for them to think. David braced himself against a wooden railing, staring out at the shimmering water. Hawk pressed his nose to David's side, offering a silent anchor. At last, David spoke. "I don't want them ruining everything. This was supposed to be a fresh start, for me, for Hawk." Gabriel nodded, scanning the moving figures in the distance. The man they'd spotted was nowhere to be seen. Maybe it's a coincidence. Let's not assume the worst. But he couldn't deny his own tension. The memory of that menacing visitor at the fence was still fresh. They lingered by the pier for a while, letting the sound of gulls and the gentle lap of waves soothe their nerves. As the festival continued in full swing behind them, David stared over the water, as though searching for a solution in the distance. Then he turned to Gabriel. "This can't keep happening," he said, voice low. "I need to settle my debts or do something drastic. I hate looking over my shoulder." Gabriel hesitated, noting the storm of frustration beneath David's calm exterior. "If it were me, I'd talk to the sheriff again," he offered, knowing it might be fruitless. David seemed unconvinced. "Without proof, there's little they can do." His gaze returned to Hawk. "I just won't let them hurt him." A sudden gust ruffled their hair, and Hawk shook off dust from his coat as if shrugging off worry. Though still alert, the dog didn't seem panicked by the crowd or the scare. Gabriel, resting a hand on Hawk's back, found himself reflecting on the shepherd's remarkable resilience. If any creature had a reason to fear life's uncertainty, it was Hawk. Yet he remained steadfast, as though trusting that the worst had passed. Maybe humans could learn from that acceptance. Eventually, they rejoined the festival. David stayed watchful, but no other suspicious figures appeared. Gabriel encouraged him to sample some hot seafood stew and homemade bread. "We came here to enjoy ourselves," he reminded him softly. "Don't let them rob you of it." David nodded, exhaling tension, as they found a small table near the water. Hawk settled at their feet, eyeing gulls that swooped low in search of scraps. They stayed until late afternoon, managing to find pockets of normalcy in the crowd. At the far end of the festival, local musicians played a folksy tune that drifted across the harbor. Dr. Ellington joined them again, inquiring about Hawk's comfort level. The shepherd, now content from a few too many fish snacks, lay placidly between them, tail thumping when people passed. As dusk approached, the festival's energy swelled. Lanterns were lit along the pier, casting warm glows on laughter-filled booths. Children chased each other with glow sticks. Vendors closed deals at makeshift counters. Gabriel turned to David, who wore a pensive smile. "See, we almost enjoyed a normal day," he said. David nodded. "Yeah, almost." He paused, scanning the festival. "I have to admit it's been a while since I felt part of something." They decided to leave before dark, not wanting to tempt fate if someone unsavory indeed lurked around. On their way back to the truck, Gabriel noticed David's brow still creased with worry. Hawk trotted calmly at his side as though trying to reassure him. No one confronted them in the parking area, and no strange vehicles followed as they drove back. A quiet relief washed over Gabriel when they finally turned onto the road leading to the cottage. Once home, they fed Hawk and sat around the small kitchen table. David rubbed his face as if staving off exhaustion. "Tomorrow, I'll call around again for work. I've got to be able to repay them, even if it's little by little. It's the only way to get free." Gabriel nodded. "I'll do whatever I can to help." The idea of David handing over money to potentially violent men gnawed at him, but he understood David's desperation. Hawk, finishing his meal, wandered to Gabriel's side. He pressed his muzzle against Gabriel's thigh, letting out a deep sigh. Gabriel ran a hand over Hawk's thick fur, smiling faintly. "Glad you handled today so well," he murmured. "You're braver than the rest of us combined." David met Gabriel's eyes, gratitude flashing there, and the moment felt like an unspoken promise. Whatever came next, they weren't alone. That night, as the wind pressed against the cottage's eaves, Gabriel sat on the edge of his bed, unable to sleep. The festival had brought normalcy, yes, but also a stark reminder that trouble persisted in the shadows. Tomorrow, David would continue his search for work, and the waiting game would resume. He felt frustration coil within him. He was a simple fisherman. He didn't know how to fight shadowy threats or coax law enforcement to act. But neither could he stand by and watch Hawk and David live in fear. Deep in thought, he heard the soft click of nails on floorboards. Hawk appeared in the doorway, looking up at him with calm eyes. Gabriel patted the bed and the dog came closer, leaning his head against Gabriel's knees. "Hey, buddy," Gabriel said softly. "Let's see if we can figure something out." He didn't know if Hawk understood the words, but the shepherd's steady gaze offered a certain reassurance. In the midst of a complicated world, Hawk's love was uncomplicated and steadfast. Eventually, Gabriel lay down, drifting into a fitful sleep with the moonlight casting pale stripes across the room. He dreamt of the open ocean and a dog paddling bravely among the waves. When he awoke at dawn to the gentle roar of the distant breakers, he felt renewed determination. Danger or not, they'd tackle each day as it came. Because in this small cottage, a fisherman, a drifting man, and a rescued shepherd had formed a kind of family, and family looked out for one another. Morning arrived with the taste of salt in the air and a quiet hush inside the cottage. Gabriel rose early, feeling the tension that still lingered behind each familiar routine. The hush of the rising tide, the faint creak of old floorboards, Hawk shifting on his bedding by the window. Outside, a pale sun cast elongated shadows across the yard, making the new security lights look almost out of place. Over the past few days, Gabriel and David had done their best to return to a semblance of normalcy. David woke each dawn to phone various leads about work, scouring the small coastal towns for positions as a deckhand or warehouse laborer. Gabriel resumed his fishing runs, heading offshore to gather a modest catch, then returning in time for a quick lunch with David and Hawk. Nevertheless, an undercurrent of unease still ran through them, a reminder that trouble could surface again. As the day wore on, David decided to walk into town, hoping that face-to-face visits might yield better opportunities than phone calls. Gabriel watched him head down the road, Hawk trotting faithfully at his side. Although Gabriel hated the thought of letting them wander alone, especially after the appearance of that threatening figure at the festival, he also understood David's wish to prove himself useful. All morning, the fisherman's mind wandered to worst-case scenarios. A confrontation in the middle of the street, men emerging from shadows to press for payment. Yet in each imagining, he pictured Hawk, baring his teeth, standing firm to protect David. The notion reassured him, even as it underscored how precarious their situation had become. By late afternoon, David and Hawk returned with cautious optimism. David had spoken with the harbor master, who hinted there might be a position offloading cargo ships at night. The pay was modest, but the hours flexible. He recounted the conversation with an air of relief, that seemed to lift his spirits. The job would require heavy lifting, yet it offered a real chance to begin paying down his debts. Hawk, meanwhile, seemed content from their long walk, tail wagging softly whenever David mentioned that the harbor master found him respectable and determined. Gabriel couldn't help smiling at the idea that a local official would place so much trust in a newcomer. Perhaps the small acts of kindness from this tight-knit community were making a difference, giving David a safe place to start rebuilding. That evening, they shared a humble meal of soup and bread at the kitchen table. Warm lamplight cast flickering shadows, while a chill wind rattled the windows. Hawk curled beneath the table, sighing contentedly each time someone's foot brushed his haunches. Gabriel noticed how David's posture had lost some of its guarded edge. The lines of worry across his brow had softened, as though the possibility of real employment offered a glimmer of hope. As they cleared the dishes, David admitted he still feared another visit from those men, but he also stated his resolve. "If I can send them something each week, maybe they'll back off," he said. "I'm not naive, but it's better than doing nothing, and I can't run forever." At that, Hawk lifted his head, ears pricking forward, as if in silent agreement. The small cottage might not be a fortress, but it was steadier ground than David had known in ages. The next morning, David walked to the harbor alone to finalize details of the job. Gabriel, wanting to keep a routine, headed for his boat at dawn, hoping a few hours at sea would still yield a decent catch. Hawk, torn between loyalties, remained at the cottage, pacing the yard or peering down the lane. The dog's alert posture hinted that he remained vigilant for any sign of trouble. Around midday, the sky darkened with incoming clouds, and a stiff breeze whipped across the shoreline. Gabriel, just returning from his fishing run, recognized the onset of a storm. He hustled to secure his boat, then hurried uphill to the cottage. Hawk met him at the gate, tail high but eyes uneasy, glancing repeatedly down the lane. "It's all right, boy," Gabriel murmured, though he too scanned for any unwelcome visitors. The storm arrived in earnest soon after, bringing driving rain and rolling thunder that seemed to vibrate the walls. When David finally appeared, soaked to the bone but grinning, he announced that the night shift job was his to start next week. Relief washed over them both, though a wedge of concern lingered like a dark cloud in the corner of their minds. A few days passed without incident. David began preparing for his new role, practicing with heavy crates in the yard. Gabriel teased that it looked like a weightlifting competition, but secretly he admired David's determination. Hawk trotted alongside, occasionally poking his muzzle into the stacked boxes as if offering silent encouragement. Dr. Ellington dropped by, pleased to see the dog's confidence holding firm. "He's come a long way," she said. "Some animals remain skittish for years after near-drowning events, but Hawk's resilience is remarkable." Her words made Gabriel reflect anew on how one fateful morning had upended all their lives. Now the ocean that nearly claimed Hawk was just the backdrop of a new bond among three individuals, forging an unexpected family. Night by night, they maintained vigilance, checking the yard before bed and ensuring each door was locked. Yet each new dawn felt slightly less burdened. There was talk of eventually clearing the brush near the fence to improve visibility and even discussing the future, like the possibility that David might save up for a small place of his own. For now, though, they were content to share the cottage. None of them voiced it, but everyone knew the best defense they had was each other. On a crisp afternoon, David decided to take a trial walk with Hawk into a more distant part of town, testing how the shepherd handled busier streets. Gabriel, due to urgent boat maintenance, stayed behind. As David and Hawk ventured beyond the familiar lanes, the older man noticed how at ease Hawk appeared among mild traffic, ignoring honking cars and occasional gawkers. They passed a small diner where David paused to inquire about leftover cooking oil the harbor master had requested. While David spoke with the owner, Hawk waited outside, ever patient, glancing occasionally at the passers-by. Then, in the reflection of the diner window, David glimpsed a man standing half a block away, somebody who wore a battered jacket and seemed to focus intently on the shepherd. Instantly, tension coiled in David's gut. Yet when he turned to face the man directly, the fellow slipped behind a parked car and vanished. Heart pounding, David retrieved Hawk and walked briskly back toward the cottage. He didn't mention it to Gabriel right away, not wanting to alarm him over a vague impression. Still, the sight of that unknown figure rekindled his worst fears. At home, he busied himself unloading crates, forcing a smile whenever Gabriel asked how it went. Hawk, picking up on David's unease, lingered protectively, as if reminding him they'd already survived worse. That night, while the cottage lights glowed and the hush of the harbor lulled them, David lay awake, counting the hours. If the threat was real, how long could they hold it at bay? Outside, the wind rustled dried leaves against the fence, making the sensors flicker. The dog dozed fitfully, muzzle on paws, but his ears remained half-cocked, ready for the slightest disturbance. Long after the house quieted, they all clung to small hopes: a job, a second chance, and the steadfast presence of Hawk, who had once braved endless ocean waves. Each day's end proved they might endure this trial together, guided by loyalty and optimism. When David came home early the next morning, Gabriel was already by the stove, flipping a pan of eggs. The scent of coffee perfumed the cottage, but David's shoulders sagged with fatigue. It was his first overnight shift unloading cargo at the docks. He set down his jacket, soaked from the lingering drizzle, and slumped into a chair. Hawk rose from his spot near the hearth and padded over to nuzzle David's leg. David managed a tired smile, murmuring a soft greeting as he stroked the dog's ears. "How was it?" Gabriel asked, voice laced with concern. He slid a plate of scrambled eggs and toast across the table. David exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Hard work, but honest," he said. "The supervisor is decent, and I'll have enough hours to start paying something toward my debts." He paused, gloom crossing his face. "But every time I heard footsteps echo in the dark, I was half convinced it was them." Gabriel pushed a mug of coffee toward him. "I get it," he replied quietly, "but it's a start. Maybe they'll see you're making an effort." David only shrugged, stirring his coffee absently. The next few days settled into a tenuous routine. David slept through much of the daylight, rising mid-afternoon for a quick meal before heading to his next shift. Hawk grew accustomed to accompanying him until the cottage gate, as though seeing him off for the night. Then, when the moon rose over the harbor, Hawk paced indoors, alert to any strange noises, while Gabriel caught fragments of sleep. Worries lingered, but as David earned his first meager wages, he gathered them in an envelope. Determined to contact his debtors, Gabriel urged caution. "Use a money order," he suggested, "something that doesn't give away where you live." He dreaded the possibility that David's contact might reveal the cottage's location. David nodded, gaze grim. "I won't let them near Hawk again. Or you." On David's third night shift, Gabriel found himself restless, listening for the sound of footsteps on the porch or the hum of an approaching engine. The fisherman had taken extra steps, propping a wooden bar against the back door, rechecking windows. Hawk, sensing tension, hovered close whenever Gabriel moved. Yet the hours stretched on in uneasy stillness, only the faint roar of waves in the distance. The next morning, David returned slightly less exhausted. He dropped a small bundle of notes onto the table. "My first partial payment," he murmured. "I'll send it tomorrow." He looked at Gabriel, eyes flicking with faint hope. "Maybe this is how it starts, chipping away at what I owe until they back off." Gabriel offered a tired half-smile. "One step at a time." Hawk watched them both, tail wagging faintly. Then David disappeared into the spare room, too drained to talk further, leaving Gabriel to clean up. The day rolled forward with a muted hush, both men operating on opposite schedules. Sometimes, as Gabriel prepared dinner, David would be rousing for his shift, the two exchanging a few words before parting ways once again. Hawk alone seemed to bridge their routines, greeting David at dawn, then patrolling the cottage with Gabriel during daylight. In fleeting moments, the three of them still found pockets of camaraderie, like a family snatching closeness where they could. Late one afternoon, David carefully sealed his envelope for the debtors and set out for the post office in town. He brought Hawk for security and walked briskly along the main street. A crisp breeze rustled the overhead signs, and townsfolk bustled about their errands. At the post office, David stepped inside alone while Hawk waited outside, tethered to a bike rack. Within minutes, David emerged, receipt in hand, relief etched across his features. But as they headed back, a flicker of motion by a distant alleyway made David pause. He spotted the shape of a tall man wearing a tattered jacket who seemed to stare in his direction. Fighting the urge to confront him, David kept walking, aware of Hawk's posture stiffening. For a moment, the man's gaze followed them. Then he turned away, melting into the alley's shadows. Back at the cottage, David recounted the encounter. "It could be pure paranoia," he admitted, voice shaky. "Or maybe they're watching me." Gabriel kept his expression steady. "Sending money was still the right choice," he said. "But if they're lurking, we need to be on guard." Hawk, lying by David's feet, let out a low whine. The dog's eyes flicked between the two men, as though reading the tension in the room. "We'll be ready," Gabriel assured him, though he wasn't sure how. Days trickled by without a direct confrontation. David continued working nights. Hawk would see him off, and Gabriel carried on fishing at dawn. Each morning, David returned with stiff limbs, forced optimism in his voice. He mailed small sums whenever possible, praying these gestures would buy him time. The phone remained quiet, no messages from the debtors, yet that silence felt ominous. Sometimes the hush at the cottage weighed heavily, as if the entire place inhaled, awaiting some unknown threat. Then, one night, the threat arrived. David had left for the docks hours before, and Gabriel was in bed, half dozing. A mild drizzle tapped at the windows, and the clock read past midnight when Hawk shot up from the foot of the bed, ears erect. Gabriel jolted awake, heart thudding. At that exact moment, security lights outside flared, illuminating silhouettes moving beyond the fence. Hawk growled, a deep rumble that Gabriel felt in his ribs. The fisherman threw off his covers, grabbed his phone, and crept to the living room. A glance through the curtains revealed two figures stepping over the fence line, hoods pulled tight. One carried something, possibly a crowbar. Gabriel's pulse thundered. He dialed the sheriff's number but got only the station's automated line. Shaking, he left a rushed message. "Intruders at my cottage, 2 men, please send help." Grabbing the sturdy piece of wood he kept for bracing the door, Gabriel braced it again. Hawk quivered at his side, eyes locked on the window. A soft scraping sounded outside near the back wall. Gabriel's mouth went dry. This was no idle threat. They were here. Mind racing, he wondered if the men had learned David's location or if they intended to intimidate him in David's absence. In the gloom, Hawk let out another growl, deeper this time, like thunder rolling under his chest. Gabriel placed a hand on Hawk's flank, urging quiet. He eased toward the back door, hearing the doorknob rattle. Moments later, a harsh thud shook the frame. "They're trying to force it," Gabriel whispered, heart hammering. A male voice hissed from outside. "Hurry up." Another grunt. The door shuddered again. Gabriel swallowed. He had no gun, no real weapon. Just the old bar of wood jammed under the knob. Through a gap in the curtains he glimpsed the men. One forced a crowbar under the door's edge while the other glanced around nervously. The motion lights bathed them in a stark glow, but they pressed on, apparently emboldened by the quiet. Hawk barked now, loud and furious. The intruders froze for an instant, startled by the shepherd's warning, but quickly resumed. The wood frame splintered under the crowbar, and the door cracked open an inch. The bar inside groaned. "Come on," the second man snarled. Summoning courage, Gabriel shouted, "Stop! Sheriff's on the way! I'm armed!" He wasn't, but he hoped the bluff would deter them. A brief hush followed. Then the crowbar man cursed and jammed the tool harder. Hawk launched himself at the door, teeth flashing through the cracks, snapping in rage. A yelp sounded outside and footsteps scrambled back. "That dog's nuts! He nearly got me!" one shouted. They retreated from the threshold, though Gabriel couldn't see how far. For a tense moment, everything hung suspended. Then, with a rush of footsteps, the intruders bolted away, vaulting back over the fence. Adrenaline spiked through Gabriel's veins, leaving him shaky. Hawk's barking reverberated off the cottage walls, unrelenting until the yard lights no longer showed motion. Gabriel sank against the wall, gasping. Outside, darkness and drizzle reclaimed the night. The sheriff hadn't arrived yet, and it felt like an eternity passed before headlights finally flickered down the lane. 2 deputies emerged, flashlights sweeping the yard. Gabriel stepped onto the porch, Hawk beside him. The door was battered, the frame cracked, but intact. "They took off," Gabriel explained, chest tight. "They nearly got in, but Hawk drove them away." One deputy scratched the shepherd behind the ears, murmuring a soft thanks. The other jotted notes, promising an increased patrol. Gabriel's phone showed a missed call from David. No doubt his co-worker had alerted him something was wrong. Not long after, David burst through the battered door, eyes wild. "Gabriel," he called. Hawk bounded forward, greeting him with a relieved whine. Gabriel rose from the chair where he'd collapsed moments before. "I'm okay," he managed. "Hawk saved me. They were after something, maybe searching for you." David's face fell as he took in the splintered wood. "Damn it," he muttered, voice shaking. "I never wanted this for you." But Gabriel only shook his head, hugging himself against a cold rush of night air. "We'll handle it," he said, though his voice quivered. "Thanks to Hawk, we're still safe." A hush settled in the aftermath of the intrusion, more unsettling than the echo of forced doors or fleeing footsteps. Gabriel, still flushed with adrenaline, paced the living room while David stood near the damaged frame, gently probing the splintered wood with a trembling hand. Hawk sat between them, alert, but no longer growling, as if his job had been done and he now waited for the men to decide their next move. Outside, the deputies had come and gone, promising patrols, but offering little solace beyond official reports. "You sure you're all right?" David asked again, voice tight with guilt. His jacket hung off one shoulder, soaked from running all the way from the docks. Gabriel nodded, letting out a ragged breath. It happened fast. If Hawk hadn't leapt at them. He shook his head, forcing away the image of the crowbar inching the door open. "But I'm fine, physically." David exhaled shakily, turning his gaze to Hawk. "It's my fault. They were looking for me, or for ways to send a message. I never wanted you in the crossfire." Gabriel glanced at the battered door. A wedge of chill night air slipped through the cracked jamb, making him shiver. "I'm part of this whether I like it or not," he murmured. "And that dog saved my life. We'll sort out the details tomorrow." Despite the tension, they patched the door well enough to keep out the cold. Hawk followed them from room to room as they did so, tail never fully relaxing. Each creak of the floor made the shepherd's ears perk anew. Only when the makeshift repairs were done did they gather in the kitchen for a mug of tea. David's expression was hollow, as though wrestling with decisions he had dreaded. "I'll talk to them directly," he announced after a long silence. "No more partial payments sneaked through the mail. I can't have them hurting you, or Hawk, or anyone else in this town." Gabriel tensed. That could be dangerous. "It's dangerous anyway," David replied. "But if I meet them on my terms, maybe I can reason with them. Show them I'm serious about repaying." Hawk, as if sensing David's conviction, edged closer to his chair. Gabriel eyed the German shepherd's worried face, then met David's gaze. "All right," he said, though reluctance weighed on the words. "But we need a plan." They stayed up until near dawn, talking through how to arrange a meeting that wouldn't leave David at the mercy of armed strangers. Gabriel insisted on involving the sheriff, at least to warn him that David planned to contact these men. David mulled it over with grim acceptance. "I don't want them spooked into doing something rash," he said, "but I do need some kind of safety net." Exhaustion finally overcame them. David slipped into the spare room while Gabriel tried to sleep on the couch Hawk curled at his feet, yet slumber came fitfully, scattered with images of crowbars and looming figures. By morning, the cottage felt subdued, the battered back door a stark reminder of how close danger had come. Over a sparse breakfast, they set the plan in motion. David called the phone number he once had for these men, a number he'd dreaded dialing. The voice on the other end was cold, demanding. David remained calm, explaining he wanted to settle things but wouldn't tolerate more intimidation. A time was set for them to meet in a public lot by an abandoned cannery 2 nights hence. The voice sneered, insisting David come alone and bring at least a chunk of what he owed. When the call ended, David's hands shook. Hawk, nearby, rested his muzzle on David's thigh, as if anchoring him in the moment. Gabriel lost no time updating the sheriff. Rogers listened, eyes grave. "We can't legally entrap them," he warned, "but I can have a couple of my men on standby. Just don't expect a sting operation. We don't have the resources for that." The following day and night bled together in nervous anticipation. Gabriel kept the boat docked, unable to focus on fishing. David still clocked in at the harbor job, though his mind clearly churned on the upcoming confrontation. Hawk sensed the tension, pacing in restless circles every evening. Dr. Ellington, noticing their stress, stopped by unannounced with warm pastries and a gentle voice of comfort. "Don't let your fear consume you," she said softly. "Remember, Hawk overcame worse. You can too." Finally, the appointed night arrived. The cannery's lot lay beyond a row of rusted warehouses near the old port. Moonlight glinted off corrugated metal and broken windows. Gabriel and David drove there together in Gabriel's truck, with Hawk in the back seat, though the men had argued about whether Hawk should come. David worried they might harm the dog, but Gabriel insisted Hawk was their best protector. They parked a block away, out of direct sight, waiting in tense silence. The plan was for David to approach on foot, a small envelope of money in his jacket, while Gabriel and Hawk watched from a hidden vantage. The sheriff's men supposedly lurked nearby, ready to intervene if anything turned violent. David inhaled, steeling himself. "Last chance to back out," Gabriel murmured, voice taut. David's eyes flicked to Hawk, then to Gabriel. "I have to do this." He stepped out, and the night swallowed him. Gabriel and Hawk circled around the block, finding a vantage behind a tangle of brush near the cannery fence. From there, they could glimpse the grim lot bathed in moonlight. David stood near an old lamppost, envelope in hand, shifting from foot to foot. For several minutes, the only sound was a distant clank of metal echoing from deeper in the port. Then headlights flared, cutting across the darkness. A large SUV rolled into the lot, its tires crunching over debris. Gabriel's heart pounded. Hawk stayed still, though his ears pressed flat against his skull. The SUV halted, passenger door opening first. 2 men stepped out, one tall, lean, wearing a cap, the other short and broad-shouldered with a sneer. They approached David, and from the brush, Gabriel could see the tension in David's posture. Words were exchanged, though Gabriel couldn't make them out. The short man spat on the ground, then jabbed a finger in David's face. David raised his hands, placating, offering the envelope. For a moment, Gabriel dared hope that money would suffice. But the tall one snatched the envelope, gave it a quick glance and tossed it aside, barking something that made David recoil. Hawk let out a low growl. Gabriel rested a hand on the shepherd, trying to keep them hidden. Meanwhile, David stood firm. He must have insisted that was all he had. The short man advanced, chest puffed, and slammed a fist into David's stomach. David crumpled, gasping. Gabriel's pulse roared, instincts demanding he sprint out, but he hesitated, remembering the sheriff's caution. If they revealed themselves prematurely, the men might flee or escalate. Another blow landed, knocking David to his knees. Something snapped in Gabriel then. "Stay," he hissed to Hawk, but the shepherd could sense the shift. He and Hawk burst from cover, hearts hammering. The men spun, surprised. Hawk's bark exploded, echoing off the decaying walls. The short man lurched backward. The tall one cursed, reaching under his jacket for what could be a weapon. David, coughing on the ground, shouted, "No, don't hurt him." Before the intruders could react further, a piercing siren cut through the night. Red-blue flashes bathed the lot. Sheriff's deputies sped into view, screeching to a stop. The two men cursed, glancing around in panic. The tall one managed to yank a small pistol free, but the flash of a deputy's spotlight pinned him. "Drop it," came the amplified command. For a single breath it seemed he might run. Then he flung the gun aside, raising both hands. Gabriel rushed to David, helping him stand. Hawk circled them with hackles raised, but the dog didn't lunge, perhaps sensing the backup had arrived. The short man tried bolting, but a deputy tackled him near the SUV. Within moments, the pair were handcuffed, forced to kneel on the cracked asphalt. David leaned on Gabriel, breathing raggedly. "You okay?" Gabriel whispered, voice raw. David nodded, wincing. "They barely gave me time to speak." Deputies fanned out, searching the SUV. One called over to the sheriff. "Found some questionable items here. Looks like they meant business." Rogers approached, radio in hand, gaze flicking between David and Gabriel. "We'll sort this out," he assured them. "Take your friend to the clinic. We'll need statements, but after he's checked." Hawk remained by David's side, refusing to let him stumble. Gabriel guided them both to the truck. There, David leaned heavily against the passenger door. "I'm sorry," he rasped. "I thought giving them money would be enough." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "They wanted more than money," he said, voice low. "But we got them." A deputy approached, handing David's envelope back. "Looks like you'll still have your payment," the man said wryly. David stared at the envelope in his shaking hands. Hawk pushed his muzzle against David's leg as if to anchor him. They drove in silence to the small medical clinic. David's injuries appeared to be bruises rather than broken bones, though the blow to his ribs left him wincing. Dr. Ellington arrived from her home, once again stepping in to offer help. While she examined David, Hawk lay outside the door, refusing to leave. Gabriel paced the hallway, relief mixing with a sense of unreality. It was finally over, or so he hoped. Those men had been arrested, caught in the act. By the time the clinic discharged David an hour later, both men were drained. They returned to the cottage near dawn, the sky stained with the first faint light. Inside, everything felt changed, the tension replaced by a shaky sense of gratitude. David sank onto the couch, pressing a hand to his sore ribs. Hawk jumped up gently, resting his big head across David's knees. Gabriel sank into a chair opposite them. "I think," he said slowly, "that we might finally be free." Outside, the last stars vanished. The ocean breeze rattled the battered door, though now it no longer felt like a harbinger of fear. Instead, it was a reminder of what they'd survived and how far they'd come. Night parted into morning with an air of cautious relief. Throughout the cottage, quiet reigned, broken only by the occasional creak of old beams adjusting to the dawn. David, sore and sleepless, sat propped on a pillow in the living room, staring at the bruises darkening on his ribs. Hawk lay with his chin on David's knees, ears flicking each time the man shifted. Gabriel, having managed a brief doze, woke to find them like that, a testament to how close danger had come and to how trust and loyalty had pulled them back from the brink. With sunlight creeping through the window, Gabriel went to make tea. Steam curled upward, filling the small kitchen with a gentle warmth. He returned, placing a mug beside David, who murmured thanks. For a while, neither man spoke, the gravity of the previous night still hovering between them. Outside, gulls cried over the harbor, and a light wind rustled the battered door they had braced. Despite the exhaustion etched into their faces, something else shone through, a sense that maybe, at last, they were free. Eventually, David mustered the energy to rise. He moved gingerly, Hawk trailing close. "Sheriff Rogers asked us to stop by the station today," he said, voice husky with fatigue. "Paperwork, statements. Maybe I'll finally see the end of this." Gabriel nodded, glancing at the envelope that still held the money David had intended to hand over. "They're in custody. That's the main thing," Gabriel said. "We can figure out the rest as it comes." Hawk's tail thumped lightly at Gabriel's tone, as if agreeing with the plan. The house might be damaged, but the bigger threat had receded. They left soon after, driving carefully over the winding road. David insisted on riding in the passenger seat this time, wanting to spare his bruised ribs the discomfort of gripping the steering wheel. Hawk lay across the back, ears perked. A breeze through the cracked window ruffled his fur. The small police station near the harbor was quiet when they arrived, save for the lone deputy at the front desk. Recognizing them, he offered a sympathetic nod. "Sheriff's in the back. He'll be glad to see you up and around." David gave a half smile, pressing a hand to his side as though to steady himself. Rogers met them in a cramped office lined with filing cabinets. He looked up from a cluttered desk, relief crossing his weathered face. "Heard you took some hits," the sheriff remarked, motioning for David to sit. Hawk positioned himself protectively at David's feet, still watchful but calmer than the night before. Gabriel stood off to the side, arms folded. They spent the next hour recounting every detail. Rogers jotted notes and occasionally asked clarifying questions. Outside, the station phone rang intermittently, and muffled voices drifted through the walls. By the end of it, the sheriff leaned back, exhaling. "They'll be charged with attempted burglary, assault, and illegal possession of a firearm, among other counts," he said. "My men found evidence tying them to debt collection intimidation schemes in several counties." A fragile sense of closure took hold. David rubbed the back of his neck, as though still braced for the worst. "So that's it?" he asked softly. "They can't come after me now?" Rogers shrugged. "They'll be behind bars for a while. Even if they make bail, we'll keep tabs on them. You'll want to stay cautious, but the immediate threat is gone." Hawk, perhaps sensing the shift in mood, relaxed enough to rest his head on David's boots. Gabriel released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Rogers eyed them both. "I understand you're not from here," he said to David, "but folks in this town have grown fond of that dog, and of you." David's eyes flicked to Gabriel and Hawk. "I guess so," he answered quietly. Gabriel managed a small smile. It was true. In so many subtle ways, the community had closed ranks around them, from Dr. Ellington's unwavering support to the fisherman's easy acceptance of David on the docks. For a man who had spent so long drifting, David finally had found a place that felt almost like home. They thanked the sheriff and headed out. The late morning sun made the water glitter along the piers, and gulls swooped after fishing boats. David leaned on Gabriel, wincing with each step. Hawk walked ahead, sniffing at posts and ropes with a fresh curiosity, as though the harbor now shone with possibility instead of dread. Once they reached the truck, Gabriel turned to David. "You need rest, and I need to fix that door." David nodded. "Let's go then," he replied, voice lightening. Hawk hopped in first, promptly settling across the back seat with a contented sigh. When they arrived at the cottage, Dr. Ellington was waiting outside, a toolbox at her feet. Startled, Gabriel pulled up beside her. "I brought some supplies," she said, gesturing to the battered door frame. "You boys have enough to worry about without a broken entryway. Let me help patch it." David shook his head, half laughing. "You're a vet, not a carpenter." She lifted her chin. "I grew up on a ranch. I can handle nails and screws just fine." Gabriel shot David a grateful glance. They got to work, measuring new wood planks and reinforcing the threshold. Hawk supervised with bright-eyed focus, occasionally stepping forward to sniff the hammer or watch the saw with vague suspicion. By early afternoon, the door looked sturdy and unblemished, a fresh coat of sealant drying in the mild sun. With the repairs done, they retreated indoors, where Dr. Ellington brewed tea. David sank onto the couch, exhaustion etched in every muscle. Hawk settled beside him, laying his head on David's thigh in a gesture of support. "I owe a lot of people my thanks," David murmured, swirling his tea. "You, the sheriff, the entire town, but especially you, Gabriel." Gabriel smoothed his hand across Hawk's back. "You saved me too," he said quietly, remembering the rescue on the water, how Hawk's presence had brought new meaning to his solitary life. "We're even." A slow week followed, with David healing from bruises and Gabriel mending battered fishing nets. Between them, the cottage found its rhythm again. Sometimes David limped along the shoreline at dusk, Hawk matching his pace. On calmer mornings, Gabriel resumed heading offshore, returning in time for lunch. He discovered a sense of peacefulness in the routine, no longer overshadowed by the fear of violence. That quiet sense of possibility was new for them both, as if life had offered a reprieve after so much turmoil. Months slipped by, each day dissolving another layer of worry. David continued at the dock job, though the night shifts eased up once his supervisor saw how reliable he was. With court proceedings moving forward against the intruders, the threat receded further. Hawk grew comfortable enough to roam the yard without constantly scanning the fence line. Dr. Ellington's checkups became purely social, and the fishermen's neighbors started inviting David to small gatherings. In that time, Gabriel noticed how David's eyes shone brighter, how the man laughed more freely. As for Gabriel, he felt a renewed sense of belonging he hadn't known he was missing. On a bright morning when the tide was out, Gabriel stood barefoot on the damp sand behind the cottage, sorting small shells from the net's tangles. David strolled over, hands tucked in his jacket pockets, Hawk prancing at his side. Together they watched the waves ripple under a gentle wind. Gulls shrieked as they dove for fish near the surface. In the distance, a freighter glided past, its silhouette cutting across the horizon. "I used to see the ocean as a place of risk," David said suddenly, eyes on the water. "After what happened to Hawk, I couldn't look at it the same. It was where I lost so much. But now, standing here, I realize it gave me a second chance." Hawk pressed his muzzle against David's thigh as if to confirm that truth. Gabriel nodded, blinking against the sun. "Sometimes the worst trials hold the seeds of what we need most," he said. "Saving Hawk changed everything, didn't it?" David's gaze swept the shoreline, the cottage, the life they'd built. "It did," he agreed. "And for the first time, I'm not just surviving, I'm living." As midday approached, they returned to the cottage for lunch. While Gabriel prepared a simple meal, David tidied the shelves. Every so often, Hawk wandered into the kitchen, looking hopeful for scraps, and Gabriel obliged him with bits of fish or leftover bread. They sat around the table, conversation flowing easily, David mentioned wanting to get his own small place in town someday, once finances allowed. Yet the idea no longer carried desperation. It was more a plan than an escape. Gabriel nodded, a faint pang of sadness flickering that David might eventually move on, though he also felt pride at seeing his friend reclaim independence. After lunch, David took Hawk for a walk along the quiet lanes, greeting neighbors who recognized the stately German shepherd that once made local headlines. Children waved from yards, calling, "Hi, Hawk!" The dog's ears perked, tail wagging, as if he relished the celebrity. David paused at the harbor master's office, verifying the next week's work schedule. "You're a good man," the harbor master said. "Glad you're staying in our town." David smiled, feeling that it might indeed be home for a while. By sunset, the three of them reconvened at the cottage porch. The sky was awash in pink and orange streaks, the sea reflecting those colors in a mirror of soft waves. Gabriel settled onto a worn chair, David leaned against the railing, and Hawk curled at their feet. Far below, the tide whispered against the shore. They watched in companionable silence, the hush no longer oppressive but comforting. David shifted, then asked quietly, "Do you ever regret pulling Hawk from the water that day?" Gabriel's answer was immediate. "Not once. I only regret the day before it when I didn't know him." David chuckled, the sound warm. Hawk, hearing his name, lifted his head, eyes shining in the dusk. He reached over, and the dog pressed closer, content. Thus ended one chapter of their shared journey, a fisherman who once sailed alone, a man burdened by debts and fleeting hope, and a German shepherd who had defied the vast ocean's grasp. Bound by fate and tempered by adversity, they had discovered that the greatest rescues happened between souls, that the real miracle was how a single act of compassion could ripple through so many lives. As the last rays of sun slipped beneath the horizon, the three companions listened to the hush of twilight, safe in the knowledge that from impossible odds an unbreakable bond had formed, and that perhaps this was only the beginning.